Hello and welcome again to another program of Searching for Answers. My name is Carolyn Thompson, and we would encourage our viewers and our listeners to turn to the book of John in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And we are presently in the chapter 18 of the book of John. And I have some delightful scholars with us tonight. And I don't always know or understand what I'm reading, but they understand it all, so stay by. On my right is...
I'm Gerald Winslow from the beautiful state of Oregon, and I'm a missionary to Southern California where I work at Loma Linda University Medical Center.
John Jones, La Sierra University, the School of Religion.
Bernard Taylor. If you're going to go for distance, my speech bewrayeth me. I'm from Australia, but I'm at University Church here in Loma Linda.
And I love to listen to Bernard preach. So glad to sit next to you, Bernard. Ivan Blazin, School of Religion, Loma Linda University.
See, I told you they're all professionals. See all the answers they've given us already? So now, seriously, go to the book of John, chapter 18, where we've read the first 11 verses, and now we're going to start with verse 12. And I would like, Ivan, would you read verse 12 of chapter 18 of the book of John?
Okay, so just after Jesus telling his disciples and Peter to put the sword back into the sheath because he has to drink the cup that he was sent to drink. So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people, and I may just put the rest of it, than the whole nation to perish.
Yes.
Better have Jesus die and rather than the Romans, because of his popularity, sweep down here and kill all of us.
Oh, I want to ask you a question, Ivan.
Yeah.
On verse 13, it says, and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year.
Yeah.
What did they do? Did they...
There was a rotation.
It was a rotation.
Yeah.
And why, Ivan, to Annas? I mean, so he's father-in-law of the high priest, but does that give him some special privilege? Or,
Yeah.
Well, he was a high priest himself.
I see.
You see? And so he passed it on to Caiaphas. So
What do you have to do to be the high priest? What was it? How did the Jews...
be friends with Rome, really and truly, because as we were mentioning last program, they appointed the high priest.
Who did?
Rome.
Oh, okay.
They appointed, but it was a purchase.
They bought it?
Oh, yeah.
Bought it.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, why
Sure.
am I not surprised? Okay.
Was the youngest of the Maccabees the first to non-Aaronic priest?
Yes. Yes. Always before it had been in that lineage. The fact of the matter is there are several puzzles in this puzzling little verse 13 you've grabbed here, Carolyn. Actually, Caiaphas is the one who's the high priest. We don't know why it says that here because we really are not, we just can't identify exactly what kind of a system was going on here.
That's
We
right.
know nothing from history of an annual appointment. So there's something that we don't know. It's twice. It's in John 11 as well, verse 48 or 49, somewhere in there. So something is going on that is lost to history that we don't know. You are right to question about why they would take Jesus first to Annas, who had indeed apparently served as high priest at some point. To soften Jesus up in some way? To set an example? To start the process and then turn it over? We don't know. We just don't understand what kind of plot this really represents.
Or was he simply somebody available at that time of night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's right, because it is getting late, isn't it?
But the temptation is to suppose that this was pretty well
Yeah.
devised, you know.
Well, in
Yeah,
verse
good point.
12,
Yeah.
it says, "Then the detachment of soldiers with
Yeah.
its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus."
Yeah, now the Jewish officials did not have authority to do this job on their own, or they would
Okay.
have. They had
Okay.
to bring the contingent of soldiers along because
Yeah.
legally they're the only ones who could do this
Okay.
off
All
the
right.
temple grounds.
All right. Okay, Bernard, would you continue on verse 15 in chapter 18 of the book of John?
Sure. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I'm not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them and warming himself.
All right, now here we have number 1 of Peter's denial of Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, isn't this in another place in the Bible predicted that Peter would do this? Do you know where that is?
Well, Matthew 16, he says, when you're converted,
Matthew
strengthen your brother.
16?
Is that Matthew 16?
I don't know.
It's
Let's
in Luke.
Luke what? Do you know?
Oh, it's in Luke.
Upper room scene. Jesus says, "Satan's been after you."
That's the one I'm
and
after.
when you have turned around, strengthen your brethren.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or
what,
you're thinking of John 13:38.
Yeah.
Okay.
Peter says he'll lay down his life. Will you
Yeah.
lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the cock
That's
crows,
it.
you will
Yeah.
have denied me 3 times.
oh, good. That is now, Jesus predicts Peter's denial,
Yes.
and that is still in the book of John, but chapter 13.
End of chapter 13.
Okay. All right.
And it's interesting, this curt response of Peter's, "No, I'm not," is exactly the opposite of
just
Jesus.
thinking the same identical
I am.
thing.
You know.
Oh, yeah,
So
I
you're
was just
right.
looking at that just
Real
now.
parallelism
Uh-huh.
here.
I'm
isn't it? Yeah.
It absolutely is. Would you continue, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So we're ready for verse 19.
Just before that, there's Peter and another disciple.
Yeah, who's that
Are we
other
to
disciple?
assume this
That's
is John?
John. Yes. Is he
We've
so?
often said that.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing is that this phrase, another disciple, occurs again in 2 chapters hence, in chapter 20, verse 2. So she ran, this is after the resurrection, and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved.
And he refers to himself like that. That's John.
Yeah, well, that's what we've
Is that
always,
right?
That's
we've
what
always
we've
thought
Yeah.
that to be John.
Okay.
John, the beloved disciple.
And the next thing is,
Okay.
how would a Galilean disciple
Mm.
be known to the high priest
Yeah.
in Jerusalem?
Yeah. So that he gets to go in somehow?
Right, without even, they don't
Yeah.
even look at his passport or,
Right,
or his,
or
pa-
your
he's
ID
straight
card.
through
His ID
TSA.
card.
Yeah, we don't know. Maybe a shirt-tail relative. We don't know.
I've wondered if,
I
did
have
John
too.
have a market for quality fish in Jerusalem that he sold? We can create scenarios, and they're legitimate questions, but the text doesn't stop to answer them.
No, it doesn't.
No, it's just somehow you have the impression that he's trusted by them, or that it's,
Yes.
it's okay that he
Yeah.
shows up.
This is well established,
Yeah.
even at a time like that he's just not quite. And then he realized, oops, I left Peter behind at the gate.
Yes, that's right.
Well, when I read text like this, I just kind of build up a whole list of curious questions, Carolyn,
Yeah.
that I get to ask in the eternal kingdom.
Yeah.
Don't you have those? Like, how did this
Oh, yeah.
part
Oh,
fit?
yes.
I can imagine spending quite a bit of time in eternity saying, well, now how about this part?
And why did you do it that way,
Yeah.
Jesus? I mean, it seems to us that you could have just not gone through all of that trouble, and it would have been easier. But do you think he'll be glad to answer us?
I believe.
I
yeah,
think he
we'll
will.
spend ample
I
time.
think it'll be a wonderful
So
time.
we're ready for verse 19.
Yes,
but
we
but
are.
to say that,
No,
the
we're
high
not.
priest,
Yes, we are.
he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. I mean, this person knows what's going on. He has a testimony that he can give. you see, about these events.
Yeah.
In fact, the one who wrote this gospel says he knows that what he's saying is the truth.
Yes.
Yes.
Last chapter.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Now
All
verse
right.
19.
Now you may go.
Now you may
Okay.
go.
Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said. When he said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered, If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Do you get this picture?
Well, it's a brief encounter there in front
Yes.
of Caiaphas. A question about his teaching, and Jesus answering, I've taught
Yeah.
openly. I don't know
Yes.
why you would need to ask. Lots of people have heard me, apparently.
That's right. But
When
I don't.
when you read that, Jerry, see, you read it in such pleasant tones. Why
It
do
might
you
have
ask
been.
me? I've
Yeah,
always been
right.
teaching in front of you.
Do you think it was more confrontational?
Well, I don't know. That's the
Yeah.
question I'm raising, actually.
Right.
You know, why do you ask me?
Yeah.
I've been there all the time. You've been listening to me,
Right.
you know, sort of a little punch to it.
Well,
Very
that's
rabbinic.
why the soldier
Question
slapped
with the
Jesus.
question.
Exactly.
He didn't like the way he was being answered, and he slapped his face.
Well, that's
That's
it.
just terrible to me.
Well, there must
Well,
have been enough punch to it,
there
I
had
suppose,
to
to
be.
use your word, Ivan, so that it prompted that rather hostile, well, not rather, very hostile response on the
Yeah.
part of a policeman. The policeman being one of the temple police.
Yeah.
What
right.
did you think of the way Jesus answered him?
Well,
it was a little confrontational.
sure, I think that he's, it probably was. I mean, you know, it's like any script. So much of human communication is not just words
That's
on
right.
a page.
Right.
We don't know the look in the face, the tone of the voice,
Right.
and so forth.
Right.
We have to read that into it. I have a hunch that it must have been sharp enough
Mm-hmm.
so that it was a confrontation.
Yeah.
Well, it
Right.
redirects
Yes.
where things are going, you know,
Yes.
because we haven't heard too much from Annas. Well, he questions him about his disciples and about his teaching, and then Jesus responds in this manner, which says, it's not your job to ask me, you need to be asking everybody else. And again, the Jesus of John is taking over control, and I think that's probably a factor that prompted the police.
That's right. There is a judgment already being expressed here. Jesus was pronouncing judgment on them for their underhandedness, their sneakiness, doing this in the middle of the night. He said, listen, you know, you've heard me, I've been there. You could have done this in broad daylight if you had had the guts to.
Yeah.
This shows what's wrong with you, not me.
So you have that big contrast between
Yeah.
he's open
Yeah.
and they are furtive,
Are-
as you
yes,
say.
that's right. By the way, the scene is reminiscent of Acts 23, verses 1 to 5, the first paragraph. That scene where Paul is hauled before the same council and has a similar experience. Ananias orders those near him to strike him, and and so forth. Similar confrontation.
Okay, who wants to continue reading? Ivan?
Okay, well, all right, verse 25. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, You are not also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not.
That's
One of the
number
slaves,
two.
that's number two. One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, Did I not see you in the garden with him? And again Peter denied it. And at that moment the cock crowed.
And I
Dramatic.
think probably I can illustrate this best of all, because if the question is, am I an Australian? And I say, no, I'm not. God blimey, mate, I'm no Aussie.
You betrayed it.
I couldn't understand the Australians when I was over there sometimes.
You can preach in my church anytime.
Yeah,
That's, you know,
right.
illustrate
Get their
things.
attention.
So there's that Galilean accent, you
Sure.
see, that comes with it. And the more he talks, the more he contradicts himself.
Yes.
Oh, poor Peter.
Now,
Oh.
what do you think, Peter? What did he feel? Do you think? Did he just suddenly just crumple into a heap and say, "What have I done? What have I done?"
Desire of Ages tells us, this by Ellen G. White,
Okay.
tells us that when the cock crowed, Jesus turned, looked at Peter, didn't need to say a word.
Just
But
look.
Peter got it. Yeah.
Heartbreaking. Gets me upset just to talk about it. You know how Peter, but Jesus was so kind. He just turned and looked at him. That's all. It broke Peter's heart. Absolutely.
Well, Peter remembered the word before the cock crows.
Yeah.
So now the cock crows, and now, bang, he's suddenly
No, terrible.
smacked with the reality of what he's done.
So let's just read on. Back in chapter 13, Peter says he'll lay down his life. Will you lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times.
Yes.
No chapter division. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Plural. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions, and so on. I go to prepare a place for you. And I think Peter would remember that as well, that this was not his defining moment. He had failed, but Jesus obviously had a longer term program for him that would get him over this. And Peter had excellent qualities. And our strengths are matched by our weaknesses. And we tend to appeal to people who aren't very bad and they don't become very good. If you want somebody to be really good, find somebody really bad. They have that capacity. They have that capacity. And this is why, maybe a minister falls into sin and we're surprised how far they fall. There's this matching. And here is Peter, that Jesus is not going to let fall by the wayside. Peter is his own worst enemy. Jesus is his best friend, and Jesus has set him up to get through this night. It really is remarkable with all that's going on with Jesus. He never lost that personal touch, and he never will.
Never will.
And he prayed for Peter, he prayed for us, prayed for all those who would believe on him, as if he named us all by name.
Yes.
All of this going on in this situation,
It's remarkable.
Of
Yes.
course, we read the story, at least I'll speak for myself. I read it, and in my imagination, I'm there watching in the moment. But if I think about it a little longer, I realize, well, this was written a long time after the event, probably. And it's written by and for people in the faith for whom Peter continued to be an important character
Right.
in the life of the church. We can see that all through Acts. And to me, the reassuring thing is that even despite the disappointment, this is a disappointing turn of events predicted by Jesus, but it's remembered, it can be remembered by the church, saved for us here in the Gospel of John as part of the story, knowing full well that he becomes a leader in the church later. To me, that does speak of grace.
No,
Bernard.
absolutely.
I mean, it means that the church could tell the story. It could be repeated, circulated in the church,
Yes.
even about one who was important
That's right.
to the church.
That's right. Okay, shall we continue on? Anybody want to say something else? Did you want to say something,
No.
Bernard?
No.
Okay.
I just want to
Can-
say one thing about Peter, just as a very short one, and that is, remember at the beginning of the gospel that Peter, Jesus says, "Thou art Cephas," and this is the rock kind of thing. Peter will be. We as Protestants have thought that sometime our Catholic friends have gone too far, but the fact of the matter is that Peter, no matter how far he fell, he would be a rock-like figure in the early church, which is what you were mentioning.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, let's continue on, and I think I'll read a few verses, okay? Now we're still in chapter 18 of the book of John, and I'm going to be reading the 28th verse. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against him?" Now, before I go any further, could you explain to me why the disciples didn't want to go in because they didn't want to be contaminated? Uncleanness? What are they talking about there?
You're talking about the
Pilate's
religio-political leaders, the priests, and
They didn't want
this
to
is-
enter the palace.
right, because that's Gentile turf, and they're coming up on Passover.
That's right. They wanted
Yeah.
to eat the
And
Passover.
Ritual
keep in mind,
defilement.
oh, excuse me, go
Talking
ahead.
about.
No, but keep in mind, and these were pagans, and they had
Yeah.
their idolatrous symbols of one kind or another around.
Mhm.
You wouldn't want to go into the headquarters of the pagan power here.
I see. They felt they would be contaminated.
Oh yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
glad Jesus didn't feel that way.
In the Mishnah,
that's interesting. You say that.
Well,
in the
That's
Mishnah,
good.
which the Talmud is a commentary on, there is a section, a tractate called Avodah Zarah, which is literally strange worship, but it's about idolatry. And I had the opportunity to read it years ago. Rabbi Apple was teaching the class, and it pointed out there that every day of every week, of every month, of every year in the Roman cycle was dedicated to some god. How does a Jew live in a world saturated by idolatry? So, for instance, before a major festival, you couldn't eat with a Gentile. Other times you could. And this close to the feast, to enter a building like this would defile them. The Mishnah isn't yet written down, but the laws that are codified there are already in circulation, as we can see here. So this is the issue, to try and keep separate from it in a Gentile world.
all right. Shall I continue on verse 29? So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." In other words, listen, if we didn't think this man deserved to be punished, we wouldn't even be bothering you at this time of night, right? Because it's getting later. Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. So, how much did Jesus know ahead of time of what would happen to him? He knew he was going to be crucified. He knew he was going to die. Do you think he had... Do you think God revealed to him some of the ways that he would be treated, that he would be on a cross? How do you feel? Does anybody have any
Well,
knowledge about...
May I cite a verse on that?
Sure.
Verse 4 of chapter 18. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward. It just
Okay.
makes the claim that
Yeah.
he had just real knowledge of what was going to...
Okay, let's read that again.
Yeah, well, the whole group comes out with their lanterns and torches and so
Yeah.
on. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and said, such and such. So
Yes.
knowing all. So
Yeah.
Jesus does know in this gospel. He's in charge. He knows everything that's going to be. He's marching according to orders and to a
Right.
plan.
Okay,
And
Go
ahead.
when you say in this gospel, I think, if I understand what you're saying, it's an emphasis that John has in telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus knows, he's in charge, he's, he takes charge of the situation.
Yeah, and you don't find, for example, in John, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" like you'd find it in Mark. has a setting in Mark that is meaningful. You wouldn't have that in John.
Yeah.
Okay, Bernard, do you want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
just Mark 16:21.
Mark 16:21.
Sorry, Matthew 16:21.
Okay, Matthew 16:21.
From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed on the third day be raised. And in Matthew, Jesus tries to get that message across to them more than once, but it's too much for them to bear.
And as you could have also pointed out, I suppose, Bernie, that it's Peter who rebukes Jesus and
Yes.
doesn't want to hear anything about this
Yes.
in that story.
Peter continually brings the temptation of the easy way out.
Yeah.
Well, but doesn't he also follow the traditional Jewish idea of the Messiah?
Yes.
The Messiah is one who comes with power, and he knocks out the enemies. He's not knocked out by them.
Yes.
All right, we have less than a minute left. I'm going to ask each one of you if you could say a few words of what we have read in chapter 18 of the book of John, and where we didn't go through the whole chapter, but I'm going to ask you quickly to say what you
Well,
think.
I think the thing that struck me the most, as we talked about it here in this session, is just the disappointment in Peter denying that he knows Jesus, but the fact that he went on to be a great leader in the church anyway.
Okay, John Jones.
Pilate's vacillating character comes through right from the beginning. They get him out of bed, and he says, "Oh, do take care of this yourselves."
Okay.
He knows they can't, but he wants out of it.
Bernard, quickly. We
Yeah,
have
for
13
me,
seconds.
For me, it's the picture of Jesus and the grace that he manifests at this time.
Beautiful. Ivan.
Well, it's the one statement, verse 14. Caiaphas knew that it was better to have one person die for the people. Jesus dies for the people.